Welcome back to our study on the book of Romans. This is the Romans Education Part 5, and this is Session 3. When Paul writes the phrase, every soul, he's not referring to our emotions, how we feel about something. He's not referring to the invisible part of our being. He is talking about people. And Paul has used this expression in Romans once already. Let me take you back to Romans chapter 2. Oh, why did I do that? I should have given you that one. I guess I'm going to get to Romans 2, but I should have given you this one here. I just got ahead of myself. Sorry. Okay. So, let me back up, make sure I'm right. Okay. Leviticus 17:15. And I'm going to show you 5 times in your Bible the phrase, every soul is used. Paul uses it 2 of those 5 times. And every soul that eateth that which died of itself, or that which was torn with beasts, whether it be one of your own country or a stranger, he shall both wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean until the even. Then shall he be clean. How many had to do that if that situation happened to them? Every one of them, without exception. And that's why he says, and every soul. And I'm going to go a little further into it, but let me give you the next one. Acts 2:41. Then they that gladly received His word were baptized, and the same day there were added unto them about 3,000 souls. There were added unto them 3,000 souls. Do you think their body was somewhere else? Of course not. They added to them 3,000 emotions. No. This is people. 3,000 souls. And they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and fellowship, and in breaking of bread and in prayers. And fear came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were done by the apostles. Here's the next one in Acts 3:22. For Moses truly said unto the fathers, a prophet shall the Lord your God raise up unto you of your brethren like unto me. Him shall ye hear in all things whatsoever he shall say unto you. And it shall come to pass that every soul which will not hear that prophet shall be destroyed from among the people. That is every soul. There's not going to be any exceptions to that. Here's the Romans 2. Tribulation and anguish upon every soul of man that doeth evil, of the Jew first, and also of the Gentile. Now, I'm glad that Paul went to the trouble to put that last phrase in there, because when he says every soul, if a Jew would be reading that, he would be prone to think this is about those Gentiles. Today in the dispensation of grace, someone may look at that and go, oh, that's about those Jews. But Paul says, of the Jew and the Gentile, there's no exception here. I'm glad he went ahead and trailed that out, but I think we were supposed to pick up on that by the use of every soul. In other words, every soul that is unrighteous before God is going to stand in God's wrath, without exception. And it doesn't matter if they're Jew or Gentile. So now we come to the 5th use of the term, and that's going to be back over there in Romans 13. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers. Now, here's what I began to think at first. Why didn't he say, because he is writing to save people, why didn't he say, let every saint? Or let every church? And I think, and I'm not being dogmatic about this. Maybe we discover something later on that says this isn't, the whole story here. But when he says, let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, because it's the use every soul, I get the idea that that is not just going to work for saints, that works for lost people too. Look, there are some things in the world that if lost people do it, can they get the benefit of doing the right thing? Of course they can. And I think that every soul, I know, look, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Romans 13 is written to lost people to instruct them about what to do with government. I think he's informing us that this instruction is across the board. Every soul. And that's what I'm seeing out of that. And that's the thing that I wanted to talk to you about. Now, the Bible also uses souls without the word every. Let me give you a couple of those real quickly, because this is the way Romans 13:1 is talking about. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers. Let everyone without exception be subject unto the higher powers. But here is soul and souls without that word every. Genesis 12:5. And Abram took Sarah his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their substance that they had gathered, and the souls that they had gotten in Haran. Now the souls they had gotten in Haran, what were they collecting souls? Well, you know that's not it. What are they talking about? The people that they picked up in that place that were traveling with them. And the Bible often uses that word souls just to talk about people. Another one, Genesis 46:15. These be the sons of Leah, which she bare unto Jacob in Padanaram with his daughter Dinah, and all the souls of his sons and his daughters were 33. Genesis 46:18. These are the sons of Zilpah, whom Laban gave to Leah his daughter, and these she bare unto Jacob, even 16 souls. Well, she didn't give birth to an individual, an invisible entity, and she didn't give birth to an emotion. She gave birth to these babies, these 16 souls. One more. Exodus chapter 12, verse 4. And if the household be too little, this is the Passover instructions. And if the household be too little for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next unto his house take it according to the number of the souls. Every man according to his eating shall make your count for the lamb. When they were, remember, one of the instructions for the Passover lamb was you had to eat it all. There couldn't be anything left over. So if it was just me and Billy and we had to eat a whole lamb, that, I'm going to tell you now, that is not happening. Is lamb mutton? What is mutton? Sheep? What's the other word for lamb? That's not veal, is it? That's goat, right?
No, veal is baby cows.
Baby cows? It's calves?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, anyway, whatever that lamb is,
It's a baby sheep.
is that what it is? A baby sheep? Okay. See, she doesn't really like that. And she wouldn't eat very much of it. So you know what we'd have to do? We'd have to invite Bob and Norma over. And you know what? I'm not sure the four of us could eat one.
There's always Buster.
And there's always Buster. But I don't know if God would, Buster's early in sonship. I'm not sure if he really understands the issue. But you know what? I could get with Sarita and Mark and we could call Joey to come back. And then we'd be worried about getting any lamb. No, I'm kidding. I'm just picking on Joey. If he hears this, he'll hopefully laugh. Okay. So anyway, that was the thing. But it's according to the number of the souls, the number of people. And that's the thing that I wanted to get across there. Joshua 10:35, and they took it on that day and smote it with the edge of the sword, and all the souls that were therein he utterly destroyed that day, according to all that he had done in Lachish. So I'm just giving you some examples that every soul is not talking about our emotions. It's not talking about the invisible part of us as a tripart being, but it is talking about people. All right. I gave you that. Let's see. I'm going the wrong way in my notes here. So in telling us to submit to the higher powers, Paul is not concerned with who is running for government. Just take that out of your thinking. When we read those 7 verses, did you see any official mentioned by name? Caesar, Felix, anyone? That's why I said that's not what he's after. Or he would have made a comment about Felix, or he would have made a comment about Agrippa, or he'd have made a comment about Caesar. That's not what Paul is interested in there, and he's not interested in the form of government. And I know I said that to you, but I'm reminding you now because we're about to get into something here. Things like party platform are not important to what Paul is saying in Romans 13, 1 through 7. So here's what you know from Romans chapter 13, verse 1. The first thing you know is the powers that be are ordained of God. He is not talking about the individuals who happen to hold those positions. He's talking about the positions of government. In other words, God created human government. It can take a lot of different forms, but any of those forms can accomplish His plan and purpose for human government. And He doesn't care which one it is. But He's not talking about who it is. You know, I talked to you last time about the guy I heard in the Sunday school class that said, I'll tell you why we got, our president elected, because America sinned against God. That's not why we got that. That's not it. God's not doing that. That's totally wrong. By the way, don't you know the other side would be doing the same thing if things were switched? You ever see the football guy that catches the pass in the end zone and he points up like God did that? What's the defensive guy supposed to think? God hates me? And if the defensive guy gets it and he goes, yeah, God's the one that caused me to break that pass up, is the receiver supposed to go, well, God just doesn't like us? Well, come on. It's all about what you want. So we can't read that stuff into there. That becomes ridiculous after a while. So the first thing is, the powers are ordained of God. And the second thing is, whoever resists the power resists God's ordinance. Now, I know there's some terminology there that we're all not real familiar with, and I want to make it that way. But to put it simply, because it is an ordinance, God means to accomplish something through human government. You get that out of knowing this is an ordinance of God. With me so far? Okay. God is just as willing to have one guy in power as another guy, as long as government does what it is supposed to do. Now those first two verses, now we start to take them apart. Oh, I'm sorry, I did that a while ago. I guess I missed that, but it doesn't matter. I gave you the Isaiah 9 thing because it was talking about there's going to be a government. There was government before us, there's government now, and in eternity there is still going to be a government. You're going to be part of that government in the creature. This is going to be a government on the earth, that Israel, where they're going to be the head of all nations, and they're going to be a kingdom of priests. Government was intended to be a part of what was happening. But look, on the earth, there wasn't always human government. There was a period of time in which there was no human government. And it wasn't until after the flood of Noah that God instituted human government. But ever before He instituted human government on the earth, God had a government in the heavens. Didn't we have angels up there that were called principalities and powers that rebelled with Lucifer? Well, that was a government. Those are governmental positions. And so there was a government up there. So to determine what it is that government's going to do, you need to ask yourself the question, why did God create government in the first place? Because the creation of government was not to take care of sin. Because there was a time when there was no sin and God installed angels into positions of government. So He wasn't dealing with sin by that government. Now very quickly, Satan did his work, and those positions that were installed in the government did rebel. But look, God was doing something else with that government, just like He's doing something with us. Okay, now back to that Romans 13:1. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. Be careful about how you define those words. You're looking at some stuff there, and you need to make sure that it stays in its context. We've been introduced to two things. This is all we're going to do today. We're going to look at these two verses, and there's two things sitting here that we need to be aware of. The first one is, and I abbreviated this when I put it up there, higher powers. There is higher powers. And then there is a singular power. Did you notice that when we read this? Always pay attention to the plurals and singulars because they're not the same thing. In fact, God didn't create the higher powers at the same time He created the power. The higher powers on this earth didn't get created until after the flood. The power got created back when He installed the angels in the heavenly government. They're two different things, and they started at two different times. I am going to take you back and show you this. But to set this up, let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, plural. And if you had to guess what that is talking about, give it to me in your own words. What are the higher powers? Okay, they're the positions of governmental authority. And men hold those positions. But when he says, for there is no power but of God, he's no longer talking about higher powers. He is talking about a particular power that those higher powers are supposed to enforce or to put into use. Now, I'm just saying it that way so as we get ready to look at this, you'll be able to kind of tell the difference here. Does everybody pretty much get that the higher powers are governmental positions of authority? Everybody gets that? Okay. I know I haven't shown you the verses yet on the power, but we have more to say about that today. As we go, I just want to identify, though, these are two different things. The higher powers, plural, and the power that those higher powers are supposed to project. And that power was present ever before human government was present. Okay. Back to Romans 13:1, and there's the higher powers. I gave that to you. And now for. For is a word that means I'm explaining why. We came in a different way. For we stopped at, I'm just explaining why. So when he says, let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, the statement that's about to follow is telling you why you're supposed to be subject unto the higher powers. And here's the statement. For there is no power but of God. So now, what do we have to know? What is that power? Why did God create that power? And what is it supposed to do? Because once we understand that power and that it's of God to do a particular thing that He wants done, then we will be able to subject ourselves unto the higher powers because we understand what God is doing with them. So that's the for as it gets ready to explain that. So what we've got to get a handle on here is two things. Number one, what was God thinking when He brought the power into existence way back in the beginning? And what was He thinking when He... Okay, I'm going to say this to you, and I know I haven't talked to you about it yet. I'm just setting you up for it. Ready? God took that power and fractured it at the flood into powers. In fact, at the flood, 3 things got fractured into parts, and the power was one of them. Now we are going to go back and look at this. And right now I'm saying it this way because I wanted to see the look on your faces as I just talked about the power being fractured, because I enjoy that. Okay, but you know what? This won't be a mystery for long. I was satisfied. I did. I got that calf at the new gate look, and I was enjoying every bit of that. So we need to know what God was thinking when He brought the power into existence, and what was God doing when He brought the powers into existence by fracturing that power. Can I just talk to you about something here? I'm not saying this is the issue. This is not the common issue. Listen carefully. This is not the common issue. Don't go out of here saying, oh, I know what the common issue is. I'm not telling you the common issue. But if you're saying, do you remember what happened prior to the flood? Why did God send the flood? What was happening? Lawlessness. Lawlessness? That's really good. What else?
The only one that was perfect in his generation.
All right, Noah was perfect in his generations. He was the only one. Anything else?
Well, it looked like Satan's plan was working.
Yeah, it did, didn't it? It looked like Satan's plan was working. And if you remember what Paul wrote in Romans 1, They no longer wanted to retain God in their knowledge. And you remember what God's response to that was? He actually did it after the flood at the Tower of Babel. Do you remember what He did? He gave them up and He gave them over. What happened? All the people of the world got consigned over to the adversary. And that looks like Satan can just rub his hands and go, yeah, I'm winning this thing. But God calls one man out of Ur of the Chaldees and makes an unconditional covenant with him, creates children from him when he's too old to have them on his own, so they really are children of God's creation, although they did come through Abraham and Sarah. But when he's getting ready to do that, all of these things, it was lawlessness, and that's an important feature about what was going on before the flood. And Satan was having his way. It sure looked like he was on the very brink of just taking it all over. Because at that time, there was only one power. But if after the flood, God separates the nations, and there's a government within every single nation, in order for Satan to control it all, what does he have to do now?
He has to be in control of each one.
He has to control every single one of them. And that is more difficult to do. If the whole thing is under one umbrella, he just needs to control one thing. But if it's here and here and here and here and here of all the countries in the world, all of a sudden, he's got to get a handle on all of them to get this done. And if he's going to use the nations of men to persecute Israel, he's got to go to work in the nations of men, and that means he can't just focus on Israel any longer. Now he's got to be busy. And look, if to get something done, you've got to solve 10 problems, that's much harder than to get it done, you just have to solve one problem. Do you see what I'm saying? So there are some other things that are working here, but that is not the main thing that's going on here. I just want to be clear about that. But it does work, listen carefully, to slow down Satan's policy of evil. Why is that important? Because prior to the flood, what was it there? It was about 1,650 years we went from Adam in the garden, and if you're going to go to the flood, you're talking about 1,650 years, and the whole earth has corrupted itself before the Lord, and they don't want to retain God in their knowledge anymore. Now you tell me, once the world has been down this slope, what is the tendency the next time? To go down slower or faster? Faster. But now answer this. Did God have a time when Christ was going to show up? He did. He did. In the fullness of time, Christ was born. But wait. If you're going to go from here, almost 2,400 years before Christ, do you think you've got another 1,650 years to try to get? What will happen? God will destroy the earth before it ever gets to that time. So God has to do something to slow the process of evil down. Did He stop it? No. And it wasn't designed to stop it. But did it slow it down? Of course. You know what the good thing about the fickleness of men as they rule nations in this world is? That works against the adversary just like it works against everybody else. If we can't depend on them, you know the adversary sometimes is shaking his head going, you know what, I got you guys all set up and now you're changing gears on me. Well, good. That slows that process down. When Christ comes, He comes at a specific time in Israel's program. He comes at the perfect time in Israel's program. And God needs to slow this bus down before it careens off the road and goes over a cliff, and Satan gets his way in the whole world, and it can't be redeemed. This is another one of the things the policy of evil is doing. So, fracturing the power into powers does work to slow that down. But I want to give you a proof that it doesn't stop the policy of evil. Because did God have a government in the heavens? Did it stop Lucifer from rebelling? No, it did not. But see, Lucifer didn't have to convince one angel. He had to convince as many principalities and as many powers as he could, and each one of those, and you know what? And that takes time and effort to get that done, and that slows that process down. And that's one of the things that God is trying to do by fracturing that power into powers. Now, let me talk to you. I'm going to give you this, and then we'll stop. What is the one thing, I'm looking for a word, the one thing that every government in the world does, and don't think about it with regard to sin or necessarily enforcing the law against lawbreakers, because God instituted government before sin was a reality. So why did He do this? What was that power for? So what is the one thing that every government in the world does do? Well, let me ask you this.
Organization.
Oh, that's really good. Organization. Where does it do that? Where does each government perform its organization task? Huh?
Every level.
Every level? Okay, but I mean, where? The United States exercises organization where? Physically where?
In the area of
In the area controlled by this country. So everybody has their own geographical area in which they're doing this. Now I want to take that word and we need to refine that word. It is organizational. But but there's another word. It's really more than that.
It keeps people from being anarchists. There's no
And you have defined this word when you said that. You keep people from being... We should get him checked for Alzheimer's. When they gave my dad the Alzheimer's test early on, and the guy went, "What is that?" And Dad couldn't think watch. He went, "You tell time with it." And when they did that, he pulled a pin out of his pocket. He said, "What is that?" And Dad went, "You're right with it." So I go, "What did every government do?" And Mark goes, "It keeps people from being anarchists." That sounds like my dad. I just need to throw him under the bus publicly because he's been gone. I just wanted to feel at home. You're welcome. All right.
Mike Erickson said last Sunday to defend against the adversary.
Okay, and it does do that. But in the beginning, this power was created before there was any adversary. So what else does it do? What's that word that defines, that takes the organization that Clifford mentioned and the key? What does it mean for people to become anarchist? What does that mean? What are they doing?
Going against it.
If the nation is plunged into anarchy, what is true? I won't make fun of you, Mark.
lawlessness.
It's lawlessness, isn't it? It's kind of what you said a while ago. Everybody's doing their own thing, right? But in order to keep that from happening, government has to exercise what?
Authority.
Authority, order. These are all right. It's just not the word I'm after. But it's right there. You're on it. You're on it. Law, true, huh? Well, they do make the laws. All of this is right. But here's the one thing that Yes. They're exercising control over their population. And every government does that. Let's go back to Iraq like we were talking about at the break. If you got caught stealing over there in Iraq, this is before we went in, what happened to you? They cut your hand off. You know what that was meant to do? Distract you, dissuade you from doing it again. That was meant to control the Look, I got news for you. If I see a guy that took an apple off a stand, they cut his hand off, the next time I'm hungry and I'm thinking about taking an apple, I ain't taking an apple. You know what they successfully did? They exercised a power of control. Because if they don't control the population, what does everybody do? I'm going to take you back in the days of the flood. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. Listen to this carefully. And the earth was... And we're going to look at this verse next week. I'm actually talking about more of this than I wanted to. I just want to get that one word control out. The earth was filled with something. Anybody remember what it was? And the earth was, Water. No, okay, before it started raining. And the earth was filled with violence. See, if there's no system of government, everybody's enforcing what they think needs to be enforced. I mean, even this doesn't do it. It's like strapping on a 6-gun and I think a guy did this to me, I'm going to go do this to him. And you know what? And then when they do that, that group goes, oh yeah, they did that, guess what we're going to do? You know what's, the whole thing is plunged into, to use Mark's word, anarchy. Everybody's going, and the earth was filled with violence. That's part of this. What Satan was doing was destroying civilization, destroying mankind. So you know what God says? I've got to find a way to slow that process down. So I'm going to institute government, because even in the heavens, before sin came, and this is where Clifford's word really comes into play, God had to control or organize the things that needed to be done. Because even when there wasn't sin, there were things to do. Hey, you won't have sin, but when you get to the creature, there's things you need to do. What we're studying now in godly justice, you're going to remember these classes, and you're going to go, what I learned there, I got to put into play here in the creature, because this is at the core of what God wants to do with government. You see how important it is to learn this. If we don't know what God's doing with government, how can He install us in those positions and have us function right? So right off the bat, He's giving us this. So there's a power that is given to government to control its population. And even though we don't like Red China and they're oppressive to their people, do they control them? Yes, they do. Yes, they do. In fact, it's more like the democratic countries are the ones that aren't being controlled. The dictatorships and the despots, they control. Oh, do they ever? And you know what? Everybody knuckles under. You know what they do? The government, and that's why I said, by its nature, it does this. Because remember what Sarita said a while ago? She said, they pass laws. What are those laws meant to do? Control the behavior of the population. And so when those things are put into place and they enforce them, the population does what? I'm looking for a single word here. You've already read it. The population submits to the higher powers. That's what they do. Now, there is something your Heavenly Father says to us about submitting to the higher powers that is going to work perfectly with His plan for human government. And even if government takes a terrible turn, let's take what Clifford and I were talking about during the last session, but we talked about it more at the break. Let's suppose the government passes a law that says there'll be no more Christian churches, no more preaching Christ to people. You're not going to do that anymore. You have Romans 13 that does tell you, let every soul be subject unto the higher powers. We have already noticed that at this phase, there is no exception given to us. And you say, well, if we quit preaching Christ, what will happen? What will happen? If we quit preaching Christ, if the Christian world quits preaching Christ, what will happen? People will no longer be saved. Would that be fair? If people are no longer responding to the message of grace, what is God now going to do? He's going to shut down the dispensation of grace. He's going to pull the saved people out at the blessed hope and resume His program with Israel. What of that? What about how much of that is contrary to God? None of it. None of it's contrary to Him. Right? I mean, if the whole thing shuts down, it just means we go. That's what that means.
So we try to get a law passed like that? Is that what you're
No, I'm not saying you should try to get a law passed like that. I think we need to be busy while we're here. But you know, but there may come a time. There were those that used to meet secretly, of course, down the catacombs in Rome. If they were found, they paid a penalty. But that was a sonship decision about whether or not you were going to go be a part of that or not. And what I'm going to tell you now is a very difficult thing. And in fact, I'm reluctant to say it, but I think everybody here can handle this. As you go through the doctrine, I've always been real careful not to be your tutor and governor. And Paul is not your tutor and governor. But you're going to get educated by the doctrine, and some of you, that doctrine, as it works in you, you're going to, when you're faced with a certain situation, you are going to respond to that situation in the way you understand that doctrine. But someone else may respond to that situation a little differently because of how they understand the doctrine. So we're talking and you say, well, which one is right? If it's a sonship decision and you're responding to the doctrine, what else could you do? What else would you do? Yeah, you know, if Clifford saw it one way and Sandy saw it another way, you know, and they're both looking at the doctrine, and they're both, I'm not talking about somebody has an evil agenda, I'm just talking about, you know, they're both looking at the doctrine, and Clifford would say, well, I'm not going to quit witnessing to people. If they catch me, I'll just go to jail. And Sandy would say, you know what, I'm just going to submit, and I'm just going to let, God knows what's happening with that, and I'm just going to let that go. God's not mad at Clifford and because he's doing it, and he's not mad at Sandy because he's not. And they both made sonship decisions. And they're going to make them out of the doctrine of godly justice that we're learning here in Romans chapter 13.
Mike, if we all learned the same doctrine, shouldn't our decisions go this way?
That'd be very close. But I mean, it is possible that there are some nuances of how you understand that doctrine. For instance, we were talking about, there isn't any exception here, let every soul be subject unto the higher powers. But how good do you feel about obeying a law that says don't witness anymore?
That's what God said.
And that's the point. Clifford is saying, if God said it, then no matter how much I like it or don't like it, that's got to be it for me. But see, there will be somebody that will look at that and say, I just can't let this person go to hell. I've got this prime opportunity, and I'm going to risk being judged by the civil authorities for doing this. And he made a decision. Mark?
We've had, through history, we've seen men that would go against oppressive laws through the means that the law gave them to do that. Like Wilbur Wilson.
Through the means of the law, right.
Of course, you know, spent 25 years trying to appeal the slavery law in England. He went through the law system to do that.
Right. And that would be fine.
I mean, that was the legal.
That would be fine. You would not be not submitting. You would be using the available resources your government allows you. That's a good point. Everybody understand what he was saying there?
I didn't hear.
Well, he was saying that in some countries you can actually use the law system that's in place to change the policy of government. And that has been done in countries all around the world. It may happen, it may not happen. But there is a lawful way to try. In this country, we have the benefit of lawfully trying to introduce changes in legislation in many, many different ways. God, that's not breaking Romans 13:1. You know, because we can lawfully, you know, petition our legislators and get things changed. So there's nuances to this. So when we come back, sorry, I kind of got carried away on that. But when we come back next time, I want to talk to you, I want to take you over and show you the power. I want to show you where that power is fractured and it's given to the higher powers and what God is accomplishing with that power to control the people. Because if those, and that's why I said if a government doesn't do this, it'll be overthrown. If a government doesn't control its population, you know, a coup will take place. And the old regime will be out and the new regime will come in. How many times has that happened in the history of the world? A lot. A lot. In fact, Clifford was saying, well, what if the mafia took over the government and then they got in positions of government? And I said, how else has it ever happened except somebody got overthrown by somebody else? So it doesn't matter. Because we talk about terms that are very hard to define. Legitimate government. What does that mean? Legitimate government. There are people that would look at what we did with England, coming here as colonies, and then fighting to become free and establish ourselves. And what they always do, well, they were oppressive, and they upped the tea tax, and they did this and all. But you know what? We would look at that, and we would say, well, these things justified what we did. I'm not going to debate all of that, because you're going to have to get this doctrine and come to your own conclusion. But you can't get the genie back in the bottle now. It's too late. We are where we are. But my point is, there were people that would even look at the formation of this country and said, man, you guys, this wasn't formed on the principle of Romans 13. Now, that's a more complicated issue than that, because there are things that did go on in which they did petition the government, and there was an attempt. But at the end of the day, they took out arms and they fought. And if England had prevailed, we'd be flying a different flag. But here we are.
They think we're still part of the colonies anyway.
I know, we're going to teach them in the kingdom. Okay, so anyway, I'm just kidding. Okay, so we have a lot to discuss about this. Is this just this little bit we've talked about, is this kind of opening your eyes to issues that you weren't thinking about before? Okay, for two of you, God bless you. Okay, great.
The way God took and reduced the life of man to, what, 70 years?
Oh yeah, that was another thing.
I mean,
The lifespan of man went down.
that changed.
That changed everything. Yeah, can you imagine if a guy is in power for 900 years?
Because the
Satan would have time to go around all of them.
But you know what? He just needs his guy, and then he can go work on the next one. There's a lot here. There's a lot here. But all of this is necessary to understand God's plan and purpose with human government. So when you look, I'm oversimplifying it. It won't work. It hasn't effectually worked in you yet, so don't go out of here going, well, I don't get it. Let us get through the passage. But when you understand what God expects out of the government of the United States, to control its citizenry, and that's all He's looking for a reason. Once you understand that reason, and you look around, and we say this, our freedoms are being taken away, then more what is being exercised? Control. Exactly. And as long as a nation controls its citizenry, you can live as a son in that nation. I didn't say you could pastor a church or you could start an evangelistic ministry. You can live as a son in an Islamic nation. You can live as a son as long as they control their population. Gosh, I'm dying to tell you, and I'm not going to take the time to do it. There's something that happens when the Antichrist and those 10 kings come to power, that for the first time there is going to be this issue that has always been true about human government that is no longer true out in the day of wrath. And then you get a real picture of how things can fall apart if Satan gets his way with that. Maybe we'll take a look at some of that. That's very interesting. I don't want to get too far off of Romans 13. This is very interesting stuff. Okay, let's have prayer. We'll be done. Father, thank you for your goodness and grace to us. It is goodness. You have given us your goodness that we might respond with repentance. You have given us grace, and it's not a performance contract, and we're grateful for that. What you have done for us, Lord, oh my, we stand amazed at all of that. And now we stand amazed at the doctrine that you're instructing us in as your sons and daughters on how to perceive the function of government. And all of these things that we have devoted time and energy and effort to are not bad things, but they are not the thing that you are most interested in. May the number one thought that comes into our mind when we think about government be the same thing that comes into your mind. May we see it from your viewpoint, and may we see it with your plan and purpose in mind. And we pray, Lord, for this effectual working of the doctrine in us.